So, Mr. and Mrs. Merland E. Anderson lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In 1955, they purchased a freestanding double-hulled steel shelter, and they actually had it installed in beneath their front yard, not in the backyard. They put it in the ground in their front yard, and this their Anderson shelter, because they're the Andersons. This Anderson shelter, not to be confused with the Anderson shelters, of course, during World War II that were used to protect England from the air raids. They had shelters named after Sir John Anderson, who was then Lord Privy Seal with special responsibility for preparing air raid precautions during the war. Immediately prior to the outbreak of the war, he was in charge of preparing for the raids, and he also was the one who initiated the development of this Anderson shelter in England. But anyways, the Anderson shelter I'm talking about is the one that was installed in the front yard of Mr. and Mrs. Merland E. Anderson in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 1955, and they actually bought their shelter from J.L. Haverstock, and Haverstock was a local realtor, like a real estate agent in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he began selling family fallout shelters kind of on the side of selling houses and property and real estate. Just like, started dealing out these fallout shelters early 1955 after he read an article about them in Life magazine. And the feature in the magazine was titled, what was it, H-Bomb Hideaway, and it advertised a $3,000 price tag for a standard shelter. I'm not sure if that includes the cost of installation. That just includes the shelter itself, the physical metal cement. I honestly don't even know what it was made out of, but it was underground shelter. It was installed actually 15 feet underground, below the surface of their front yard, and they actually maintained it well into the 60s. And there was an issue, though, the Andersons had with their shelter, and that was that it was basically insufficiently anchored against the high water table that Fort Wayne had when the shelter was first installed in 1955. So it was actually a year before the Cuban Missile Crisis. The shelter literally rose up out of the ground and popped up to the surface, and then they quickly had to call the guy back and reinter their shelter. And so that was kind of some problems I had with it. But eventually they sold their property in 1968, and the entire shelter was actually excavated sometime after they had sold the property, and it was donated to the National Museum of American History. And the day before the shelter was exhumed, a live radio show for a local radio station and broadcasting for the Fort Wayne area did a broadcast from within the shelter. And the radio hosts, their names were Elvis and Jack Hammer, and they were broadcasting, what was it, 98.9 FM, like WBYR, I guess. The Bear, yeah, WBYR The Bear, 98.9 WBYR The Bear for Elvis and Jack Hammer. And after several years after this broadcast in 2013, Jack Hammer went on record to comment that the 4 hours was that was long enough for us, and he said sorry, we should have cleaned up, because I guess they left the shelter a mess. And this is an article in 2004 actually said that Jack Hammer sadly was canned by some asinine management decision at the Bear sometime following the broadcast, and Jack Hammer actually moved over to another radio station, 102.3 FM, WXTW, where he worked with a guy named JJ Fabini. And of course, the Bear had to replace Jackhammer, so they came up with TNT, which are Turner and Tommy, and Turner and Tommy were, of course, less popular than Elvis and Jackhammer, who did the broadcast from the family fallout shelter, which brings us to the title of today's episode. Good evening, everyone. We're going to be talking about family fallout, which is the next episode of the Jetsons, for us to discuss. It's morning time at the Jetson residence. Oh, that was a weird start. Sorry. So it's morning time. Morning time. It's morning at the Jetson residence, and Jane is calling everyone for breakfast, bringing the family together. And she rings a triangle, like a metal triangle, that comes out of the wall above her, held by one of those robotic arms. And the striker for this triangle is perfectly balanced on the base of the triangle when it comes out. And then after she rings it, she puts it back on the base and balances it again perfectly, which is impressive. And the triangle then retreats into the wall. And having rung the triangle, and seeing that there are still no members of her family present in the kitchen, where she then presses a button on the counter, and another robotic arm comes out of the same hole in the wall. And this time, the robotic arm is wearing the sleeve from like a Civil War uniform, and it's actually holding a bugle. And it's a little bit hard to tell because the arm is at a bit of an angle, but so the chevrons are upside down. But it appears to me, based on what I found, that this robotic arm would be ranked as a staff sergeant in the Confederacy. And Jane actually plays 6 notes on the bugle herself, and then the arm retracts again. And this of course brings in George to the kitchen on his moving walkway, and he's commenting that he's glad he made it in time before the rocket started to go off. And this morning is special because Judy is cooking breakfast. Judy's actually the one preparing the meal for the family, and she wants to show off something that she learned in cooking class the day before. George, he does the old, I'll look at the time, and tries to come up with an excuse to leave. And Elroy and Astro, who have shown up, they do the same because they also are not interested now knowing that Judy will be the one preparing the meal. So they try and get out of breakfast. I think Elroy says he has a Martian history test that he can't miss, and George says that Spacely needs him to be there early or something. And, Jane puts a stop to it, and Rosie is there, and she even does like a radio thing in like dog frequency to get Astro to come back, like almost like a dog whistle kind of thing. And so Jane and Rosie put a stop to them walking out on breakfast to spare Judy's feelings, of course. And so then we have everyone back, and Judy announces that she made eggs Copernicus to serve for the breakfast. And the machine, so she's like pushing buttons on one of those like computer machines. It's the, their old, the food arachicycle. And that actually starts to break down and go all haywire there on her. And even though she did this in class yesterday, I guess this machine couldn't take this order, and it begins flinging the eggs everywhere. And Elroy and Astro just get they get hit like right away. And George he's obviously been around long enough to know to start ducking, and he's like, I don't see anything wrong with this, and he ducks under 2 eggs, and then finally an egg comes from the other direction and hits him, and this is what he wasn't expecting. So that gets him to finally admit that there's a problem to Jane. And he doesn't want to get rid of it. He doesn't know what to do because they've had it since their wedding. It's a part of the family, this food arachicycle. But Jane and Rosie convince him that they need a new one. And because they don't want to eat out 3 times a day. They need food. So they decide to get a new one, and that's how breakfast ends at the Jetson house for the morning. So later at Spacely Space Sprockets Incorporated, Cosmo Spacely, CEO, is watching a game at his desk or his office. He's watching a game show on TV called Family Fallout. The TV is up, I guess it's like one of those TVs that's up higher, like at a waiting room or in a hospital. And it is shown, it's basically a question-based show where the host, who's his name is Richard, he's asking a group of people between, it's Family Feud. He's asking a group of people between which there exists a familial bond, oh my gosh, to answer subjective inquiries to find answers given by a studio audience at an earlier time. The current question being discussed, this is a bad take, is about the most popular food. What is the most popular food on Mars? Richard gives the family of contestants 3 choices to pick from for what is the most popular food on Mars. The first choice, chocolate gremlins, Manitoid pizza, or fission fried chicken. A Manitoid actually is someone who's from Manitou Springs, Colorado. And according to uh, Smithsonian Magazine and planetary scientist Kevin Cannon, I'm gonna, yeah, humans on Mars will likely live off lab-grown meat, products made with insect protein and I should review this before humans will on Mars will likely live off lab-grown meat, products made with insect protein and vegetables grown in underground tunnels. Um, why did I write that? Live off lab. Uh, oh, oh, this is okay. So what? So what? What? Okay. The question is what is the most popular food on Mars? But this is what actually would be the most popular food on Mars. Is that will likely live off lab-grown meat, products made with insect protein, and vegetables grown in underground tunnels. But the choices are none of that. The choices are chocolate gremlins, Manitoid pizza, or fission fried chicken. Manitoid being someone from Manitou Springs, Colorado. And the Cosmo, as he's watching this show, he shouts out that the answer is in fact the chocolate gremlins, which is of course correct. The contestant phrases the answer in the form of a question, of course, and asks, "Is it gremlins?" And they get it correct. Also, Cosmo is overjoyed that he got this question correct, and he remarks that this show is easy. His family is going to be on it later tonight, and he thinks that anybody with half an IQ can get them. So his family is actually competing for the Grand Galactic Prize, and Cosmo, after watching that, he calls his competitor, who is of course Cogswell of Cogswell Cogs, and he wants to tell Cogswell to tune in that evening to watch his family win the Grand Galactic Prize. So he calls him up on this video chat screen, and he actually just gets an answering machine asking him to leave his name and number and income tax bracket. So it does a little jingle. Um, here's a name that rings a bell: Cogswell, 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 and then he responds, sarcastically, if you want a cog that no one can sell, call Cogswell, Cogswell, Cogswell. And so that doesn't work. He doesn't really leave a message telling him to watch this show at all. But he just goes back to watching the show, and he sees a contestant answer the hypotenuse of the glass's degree divided by pi. And this answer actually kind of intimidates Cosmo because, some of the family, he says some of the families on this show are pretty sharp. So he determines that he must need a fix for the game. He has to set up a non-intelligent family to play against his family to ensure that they will win. And he's like, where am I going to get a non-intelligent family? And then immediately after saying that, in walks, or I guess in slides, George Jetson. And George is there to ask, most likely for a raise, considering he now must, buy a new Futurakacycle. But instead of letting him talk, Cosmo just initiates a discussion with George about the show, Family Fallout, and it's still on, and they watch the show go over what the Grand Galactic Prize is. And according to the show at this moment, the Grand Galactic Prize consists of it's like a brand new Alpha Beta Romeo, which is like a space car, and It's an all expense paid 7-night trip to Las Vegas. And the third component of the Grand Galactic Prize is a tax-free cash lump sum of $5 million. And, you know, Cosmo's like, hey, how would you like to be on this show? And George is like, how would I ever get on that show? But Cosmo's like, well, connections are my middle name. So he tells George that he will get him a tryout. And George is like, oh boy, I better go home and tell Jane because this will solve all our problems if we were to get the Grand Galactic Prize. And of course, Cosmo remarks that he loves having loyal and especially gullible employees. So George is explaining the situation to his family. He gets back home, and Judy remarks, "Oh, family fallout. Isn't that the show where the MC goes around kissing everybody, and that earns a yuck, from Elroy?" But George is like, "Hang on, son. That yuck kiss might be worth $5 million," and it's interesting because kissing contestants on Family Feud started, of course, with Richard Dawson. And it was within his first few weeks as the host of the Family Feud, there was a female contestant, probably, one of like the first, within his first month of being hired, there's a female contestant who was so nervous during the show that she couldn't think of a green vegetable to say. I guess it was the question was name the top 7, 8, 6 green vegetables. I don't know how many, but I guess they pulled the audience, asked Liz to name a green vegetable. I mean, she could have said kale or grape leaves, green beans. She could have said okra. Kohlrabi? Even a green pumpkin, zucchini, of course. Green capsicum, green chili peppers. She could have said like a ridge gourd kind of thing, or green mint even. You have arugula, watercress, asparagus, coriander, leek, lettuce, microgreens, perilla, cucumber, artichoke, calabash, edamame, celery, coyote, snake gourd, spinach, bitter gourd, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and of course peas. But Richard, she couldn't think of any of those. So Richard tells her, he says, I'm going to do something that my mom would do to me whenever I had a problem of any kind. And then Richard goes and kisses her on the cheek and said, that's for luck. And then, of course, she responds, asparagus. And then her family actually went on to win. So that gave her the luck that she needed to think of that answer. And ever since then, people like the kissing. The network polled audiences and viewers many times over Richard Dawson's career as host, asking if they should do away with the kissing, and it was always a majority of responses in favor of doing the kissing. So, anyways, Jane questions George. He's like, "How could it be that Mr. Spacey's being so nice to us? Getting us a tryout?" And George satisfies her qualms by claiming that, of course, underneath Cosmo's sneaky and mean exterior, there is a kind and caring human being. Eventually, the family decides, hey, we're doing this together as a family. We can do it. And they kind of do like a little chant, and they get pumped. At Asteroid TV Productions, an episode of Family Fallout is starting, and Richard Rocketeer rockets into the studio, and he asks a cheering crowd if they are ready for some nuclear family warfare. This is a new episode of Family Fallout they're taping here, and the Jetsons are the contestant on the left. They're up, and George introduces himself. He gives a nice wink at the camera, and he says he's a digital index operator at Spacely Space Sprockets. So he's basically the poster child for a post-work world. And Richard gives George a big hug. Judy, Jane, and Rosie all get kisses, which they enjoy. And then Elroy, when Richard goes to say hello to Elroy pulls a laser gun on Richard and quotes Clint Eastwood from Sudden Impact, 1983. And their opponents are introduced subsequently. And to their surprise, of course, it's the Spacely family. And, Cosmo pretends to be surprised, but he knew it was going to be the Jetsons who were up against him. And Cosmo, of course, everyone knows me. I'm the CEO of Spacely Space Sprockets, the favorite sprocket of sprocket lovers everywhere. And he introduces his wonderful family. He has with him his wife, Stella, her mother, Mrs. Meltdown, Cosmo's son named Arthur, and their family's dog named Zero. And then they're off. Like, they've done the introduction, so they immediately begin the game. And the first question is, what is Kepler's third law of planetary motion? And we know, of course, Kepler's three laws, the first one being that the orbit of a planet is an ellipse with the sun at one of the two foci. The second one is that's the line segment joining a planet, and the sun sweeps out equal areas during equal intervals of time. That's a pretty cool one. And then the third one, which is the subject of this question, the square of a planet's orbital period is proportional to the cube of the length of the semi-major axis of its orbit. And that gives us the answer, but no one knows it until Rosie buzzes in. And Rosie, being a robot, can have it. I don't know if it's like Watson on Jeopardy or how she knew it, but it makes sense that the computer would know. And she states that the squares of the periods of any two planets are proportional to the cubes of their mean distances to the sun. And this is, of course, true for all planets, not just any two, but she's technically correct. So they get the question right. And next, immediately after that, the judges rule that computers are not allowed to play, and Rosie gets replaced by Astro, but I guess they keep the points. So that's kind of cool. They got a freebie there. We move on to the next question, and it's asking to name the famous rock and roller who conquered the universe with his big hit. You probably know this one, Eep Op Ork Ah Ah. And Judy immediately buzzes in. This is, of course, Jet Screamer, her favorite. And, Spacely's wife, Stella, is starting to get upset because now they've lost two questions. But, Cosmo's like, well, she's a teenage girl, like, obviously. Anyways, the next question, Richard holds up a pair of pants that are kind of shredded at the bottom. And he asks what famous clothing designer created the shredded look after his pants were ruined by a runaway lawnmower. And Stella is like, oh, I know this one. It's on the tip of my tongue. And as she's like thinking of it, she's striking Cosmo on the head repeatedly. But in the meantime, Jane buzzes in and answers, it is, of course, famous clothing designer Calvin Klein. And she is correct. Now Stella is threatening Cosmo with asking the lovely Mrs. Meltdown to move in with them immediately upon their loss of this game, which is a threat. And Judy remarks like, "Hey, these questions are so easy," and George is like, "You know what, Judy? The real question is where the heck am I going to work if we win?" Because he sees the trouble he's in that Spacely has drawn up here. So the next question, Richard Rocketeer pulls out a $1 trillion bill and asks whose picture is on the front. Cosmo is actually the first one to buzz in, and he answers that it is J. Paul Galaxy the 27th. And contrast, I guess, I don't think they actually ended up, I don't think Jerry got it, but our $1 trillion coin, if we did end up doing it, they might have done it by the time you're listening to this, if Jerry got it. But the $1 trillion coin will actually have the Statue of Liberty on the front, which is kind of cool. But Cosmo is correct. On the $1 trillion bill is, of course, J. Paul Galaxy the 27th. So eventually the score becomes Space Lease 7, Jetsons 6 later on. And I guess so we skip ahead to when the score is Space Lease 7, Jetsons 6. The next question is, according to TV Galactic Guide, what's the most popular space monster on television? Elroy takes this one. He buzzes in immediately with the correct answer is Mogzilla. Mogzilla is actually a British, it's a children's book publisher. They make kids' books in the UK. But Elroy is correct. And the game becomes tied 7-7, one touchdown each. And it ends with a promise of bringing both families back together to break the tie at another time. So it's kind of like Cars, if you've seen the movie Cars, where it starts with a tie, and then they're going to bring back the tying teams for a tiebreaker later on. So now we kind of have the intimidation scene. So later at work, George is, he's terrified of winning because he knows if his family wins, he's probably going to lose his job, and he can hardly work. So Cosmo kind of just starts messing with him. He picks him up with the Robo Claw and brings him over to the punch card machine. The punch card machine, famously known as Rudy, with the big green face on the screen. And he basically prints out a massive punch card that like floods the screen. It's like, a billion tickets at an arcade coming out of the machine kind of thing. And Rudy is, of course, acronymically formed name. Rudy is an acronymically formed name by referential universal differential indexer, which is kind of what George works on. So he basically just pushes buttons all day for this punch card. And with regards to referential universal differential indexers, occasionally it becomes possible to come across a situation in which the desired number of divisions on the workpiece cannot be obtained by simple indexing, So using simple indexing using the, of course, index planes available with the machine. So these jobs can actually be done by this differential indexing, which is what we have here. And for differential indexing, the lock of the index plate is actually withdrawn so that the index plate is completely free to rotate. And when the index crank is rotated, then the motion is communicated to the workpiece spindle. And speaking of workpiece, George is now worked so hard that he can barely move his finger from pressing buttons all day. And Spacely's like, well, you'll be home from work early every day if you win on Family Fallout. So now George says that he gets the message about not winning, and he's in a tough Spacely because his family wants to win, and his boss will ruin his life if he wins. So he goes home. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna get it from you if I win. I'm gonna get it from Jane if I lose. So he doesn't know what to do, and his finger is all messed up from pushing those buttons, and so he leaves, and Cosmo goes to Rudy, actually, after George walks out, or slides out, with a special assignment, and this is kind of revealed later on, but Rudy has this, like, underwater cartoon voice going on. He sounds like he's in the water, but that assignment will be revealed later on. So it's the next morning, and Jane is getting breakfast. She asks George if she should order 1 or 2 breakfast cubes from McDippers. And actually, according to Urban Dictionary, McDip is when you have to leave when you leave a social function with the intent of going to a McDonald's. But George he doesn't want any McDipper breakfast cubes because he's like all sickly with a sore throat. And Jane, he's got like the thing on his head, like the kind of looks like a whoopee cushion that's like strapped to his head. And he's all like sick. I think it's an ice bag, a bag of ice on his head for like a fever. But Jane is like, well, hang on a second, George. Is this a Spacely sore throat? As a means of getting out of the game show that night. It's kind of like a Ferris Bueller thing. And George is like, but no, this is a real sore throat. So Jane calls up Dr. Radius, who is George's primary care physician, primary care PCP, PCP, and he instantly appears. Dr. Radius instantly appears on the big screen in the room, and this is a telemed visit that happens instantly, and Dr. Radius is ready to go at a moment's notice. I don't have any. I made a note that I was going to write a Radius joke, but I guess we'll have to circle back. Dr. Radius reaches through the screen with his popsicle stick and diagnoses George with a psychological sore throat caused by hyperdrive tension. And I guess this is kind of similar to how in The Force Awakens, Han Solo and Rey both note that a compressor has been added to the fuel line, and both agree that it puts too much stress on the hyperdrive. So George is under a lot of stress, but Rey actually bypasses that compressor manually, and when they're not otherwise able to escape Han's freighter at light speed. Anyways, Dr. Radius says that George can't go to the show because of this condition, this psychological sore throat, hyperdrive tension. But nevertheless, Jane and the kids are determined to win with or without George. So we return back to the show, Family Fallout, with the line, "Welcome back to another devastating battle on Family Fallout." This is the tiebreaker round. Winner gets all the glory and prizes. All the contestants return with, of course, Astro subbing in for Rosie and sans George on the Jetsons. Cosmo asks where George is, and Jane is like upset and blames Cosmo for George's absence and his apparent case of lunargitis. And Cosmo's like, "Yeah, temper, temper, temper. You know, don't blame me. Your husband is sick." Um, they begin the game. The first question is, according to the song "I Left My Chip in Supernova," what instrument did the Monkey Boys play? And this song is, of course, a parody of the timeless Tony Bennett masterpiece, "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." Highly recommend. And the Monkey Boys are the Monkeys. That's the parody. The Monkey Boys are the parody of the Monkeys, and with two E's. And this, that reminds me of the. There's another parody of that song. It's the Davy Jones rendition. "I Left My Heart in Isla Cruces," but Rosie is in the audience at this point and doing that dog frequency communication thing from like earlier, and tells Astro the answer, which is a clusterphone. The instrument that the Monkey Boys play is the clusterphone. So Astro wins and gets it right. George is watching from home with his like bathrobe on in the chair, and he's like proud of Astro. He's like, "Wow, he learned a lot at dog training school." But then he realizes that this is actually really bad for him because he doesn't want to lose his job still. The next question is name the Nova Prize winning author who wrote Of Mice and Martian. And the same thing happens with Rosie and Astro gets the answer correct. This is, of course, John Starbuck. I'm not sure if that's referencing anything, but Cosmo's family starts to get upset by this because now they're down two again, and they're being embarrassed by a dog. There is a dog on their team named Zero, but he has not said anything all episode. Astro is the only. I think I mentioned that in my first episode, how Astro could talk, and he still gets like captured by the dog catcher in that first episode or second. That's actually, yeah, that's in the first episode. But Cosmo has a trick up his sleeve. He takes out these earbuds or like earplugs, and he's like, I've got a secret weapon. And so we go to he puts them in his ears, these red like earplug things. So the next question is, if you are vacationing on the brightest star in the Andromeda constellation, where would you be? Google says that the answer is Alpharets. Cosmo blocks the message from Astro using his radio earplugs, and Rosie gets like an antenna ache, she says. So like he like interrupts that communication, and somehow with his earplugs he gets the right answer. And like Astro is like, "What's going on?" Rosie is like in pain. So Cosmo's like, "Yeah, look, now I've got it." He knows the answer, and he says to Stella and his threatening Mrs. Meltdown that winning this game will be as easy as pi to the 90th degree, which is about 5.54 times 10 to the 44. Pretty easy. So Rosie heads out of the audience and takes a car, space ship and goes to find the interference, the source of this static fray she's experiencing with her antennae. And she actually tracks it, of course, to Spacely space sprockets. And this is the where it's revealed that Rudy is behind this interference and this kind of cheating that they're doing. Not that the Jetsons weren't doing it themselves, but Rudy is feeding the answers to Cosmo through these AirPods that he's got in. And there's a question as Rosie's making her way into his office. There's a question: name the most popular bubbly beverage on Venus. And Rudy says Spanglo fish with a twist of lime. I would have said water personally, but Rosie shows up, after Spacely gets it correct, and she immediately goes to. She's like, "Oh, I should have known." This was, immediately goes to rewires Rudy to turn him. She's like, "I'm going to turn you into an honest computer," right? So then the next question, we go back to the show, where the Spaceleys are now doing much better. And the next question is, what planet's highest military honor is the Flugamat? And there's three choices. The choices are Titanius, Dwarfus, or, of course, the planet Squeegee. And Cosmo goes to answer the question, but his earbuds, instead of telling him the answer, they electrocute him, and his ears catch on fire. And his mother-in-law is like, "Oh man, this guy, I'd said he was nothing but a hothead." And that this is her vindication for calling him a hothead. And Jane's just like, "All right, this is our chance. Now we can come back. Now that his ears are on fire." So the Jetsons take advantage of their opportunity here now that there is no more cheating going on. Astro is not being helped by Rosie, and Rudy is not helping Cosmo. And they bring the game. Also, Cosmo is deaf and he can't hear anything, and he keeps asking, "What did you say?" every time someone tries to talk with him. But they bring the game to a tying score of 27-27. And there are 30 seconds left to play, so there is one final question to decide the game once and for all, the tiebreaker question. And so this final question, here it is. What do the letters RUDI stand for? That's right. You know it as well as I do. It's the referential universal differential indexer. And George is going to Slumdog Millionaire this and appear in, and he answers the question correctly. He just shows up, and the Jetsons win. And Cosmo is like, "Jetson, what are you doing here? What happened?" Because he still can't hear anything. But then his family, Cosmo's family, to collectively yell at him. Jetsons won, and now Cosmo can hear again. He hears that Jetsons won, and then he walks over to George and is like, "George, you're fired." And after that, the Cosmo and George are both picked up by the RoboClaws again, and now George is actually presented with an interesting choice. He basically Richard Rocketeer explains to George that he has to choose between keeping the Grand Galactic Prize, which we know from earlier is a brand new Alpha Beta Romeo, an all-expense-paid 7-night trip to Las Vegas, and a tax-free cash prize of $5 million. And they've said, talked about this $5 million a couple times in this episode and are looking forward to winning it. So he has to choose between the Grand Galactic Prize, or he can choose to receive a mystery prize that is behind a force field that kind of looks like a space laser. It's like a pink, purplish laser thing. And so this is kind of almost a Monty Hall. And Richard's like, the mystery prize could be anything from a brand new space car to a worthless piece of space junk like the Millennium Falcon. And I don't think the Grand Galactic Prize that we've seen is worse than anything that could be in this range. So I think the obvious choice would be to go for the car, the money, and the trip. But Cosmo threatens George, and he's like, you better take the, you better. Cosmo threatens George, and he's like, that's what you'll be, is a worthless piece of space junk. But then there's another twist here that Richard adds in, because George is the winner, that if he chooses the force field, then his opponent, the loser, gets the Grand Galactic Prize, which would be Cosmo Spacely would get the Grand Galactic Prize if George Jetson picks the prize behind the force field. So Cosmo is like, dude, pick the force field. And George is like, all right, I picked the force field. And Jane is like, oh my gosh, George, how could you do this? And immediately revealed to us is the prize behind the force field. It's, more of a laser beam, like I said. But it's revealed to be a supersonic Big Dipper deluxe menulator, which is, of course, the latest in food Arachicycle technology furnished by Retro Rockets Incorporated. And Jane is immediately elated and loves this prize, goes to give George a big hug. And Cosmo's like, you did well, George. I'll give you your job back. I won't even give you a pay cut. And George is like, thanks, Cosmo. You're all heart. You're such a good guy. And then Cosmo is like, all right, now let's see what I've won, which should be the Grand Galactic Prize, which we know is the Alpha Beta Romeo, the $5 million, and the 7-day and night all-expense-paid trip to Las Vegas, and that $5 million is tax-free. But it's revealed now that the Grand Galactic Prize is a lifetime supply of Cogswell's cogs. And Cosmo is like so disappointed by this. And he's like, and then George chuckles and is like, well, I guess the excitement was too much for him. And that's the end of the episode. But, you kind of have the implication that Cosmo did not get a good prize because of his disappointment, because he has a lifetime supply of Cogswell cogs. But I'm kind of convinced, I don't know what your thoughts are, but Cosmo Spacey could benefit. Like, if he has a lifetime supply of his competitor's number one product, then I think there might be a way for him to use that to his benefit. I don't know what lifetime. Maybe they are just worthless and Cogswell is completely incompetent. I don't know. But depending on the stipulations of this lifetime supply arrangement, he could stand to profit, given his industry position. It could be a huge win. He saturate the market, devalue the company. I don't know. But either way, he didn't win an Alpha Beta Romeo, a 7-night trip, all expense paid to Las Vegas, and a cash prize, tax-free, of $5 million. Thank you. That's it. I'll end it here, and once again, thank you for listening, and have a great night. Goodbye.
Excuse me? Excuse me?